What's happening, my fellow geeks and geekettes? Welcome to a brand new, very exciting episode of Cosplay, Chris. Now, in honor of our brand new fan film, Gotham Noir, that is currently crowdfunding on Kickstarter. I will leave the link down below. For Gotham Noir, I've teamed up once again with Daniello Barcelli and Sarah Leica of Lux Media, but this time we have the famous Vincent DeSanti of Womp Stomp Films coming on to help with this fan film. Today, I'm going to be showing you guys a behind-the-scenes look of molding, casting, and finishing the Batman cowl that I will be sporting in the fan film Gotham Noir. So it is done, it is here, it has been resin printed at a company called FactFox, which I've used in the past. Now, this is based on a 3D scan of my head that was originally done by my good buddy Miles, hashtag my buddy Miles. The scan was then cleaned up by Art Deving, who then went on to design the cowl. So because this takes place in the early 1900s, we wanted to give a sense of really kind of homemade, crude with the stitching, very reminiscent of Pattinson at the same time, but the ears, I love the ears, I love how demonic the ears look. We have a beautiful leather texture, and here it is in all its glory, resin printed, ready to go. Now, originally, the base color was white. That was the raw color it came in, and the camera wasn't reading it too well, so I gave it 2 coats of gray primer filler, obviously to fill in some of the print lines. There were minimal print lines, and they kind of blend in with the leather texture, but also the camera is able to pick up the beautiful detail that you see right here. So what we're going to be doing is creating a silicone glove mold. Now, this is indeed going to be separated at the neck, very much like Christian Bale's Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises cowl. So the idea is once it's separated, I'm going to have a bust of my scan 3D printed by my good buddy Ben of Benable FX. I'm then going to get a Lycra diving hood, put that on my scan, then put the neck seal over the hood and attach the neck seal to the hood, like adhere it around the perimeter here, because that way it'll help the neck seal snap down into place, and then pop the cowl on top, and theoretically I'll be able to move my head without any real bowing out of the neck seal, because that can happen sometimes unless it's tacked down. And then obviously painting, finishing, weathering, highlighting all the beautiful detail of the stitching right here. So like I said, Gotham Noir is now currently on Kickstarter, and we're really excited about this one. So again, just wanted to show you guys a behind the scenes look of what's going to go into the engineering of this cowl, and also some nice gnarly worn shots at the end. Now, the silicone we're going to be using is Pinky Seal. You guys have seen me use that a lot. I love it. So we're probably going to work towards about 10 good coats, including some keys that are going to be placed over various areas of the cowl. I'm really excited. Kind of nervous at the same time, because you put so much work and like a financial investment into stuff like this. You want it to fit perfectly. So from what I've seen with the scans and everything, and Art Deving has been incredible comparing the scans to how the file looks with my head scan, it should be a pretty good fit. Now, we're going to be casting it in a material called F140, which is a flexible urethane from Barnes. I'm going to be tinting that black. That's what I used on the Phantom cowl a couple of years ago. So it's very user-friendly. You don't really see many tutorials on casting in urethane these days. So obviously urethane is the ideal way to go. But before we get to any of that, we've got to slap some silicone on this beastly looking thing. So let's get to it. You know it's time for some shitty commentary. Now, I do apologize in advance for A, the grey hairs you're going to be seeing a lot of, and B, the awful fashion sense that I sport in this video. I'm one of those people where I wear daggy clothes when I'm not going out, especially when I'm doing stuff like this. But all in all, I did about 10 coats. Now, the first 2 coats are always very important. That's called the print coat or print coat. So you want to get into all that finer detail, especially the stitching. The last thing we want is air bubbles in our urethane castings. And because it was a bit colder on this particular day, it gave me a bit more time to really work it into all the details, grab a straw and blow out those air bubbles. Now, I do usually start off with 4 just untouched coats. And by untouched, I mean no thick seal, which is a thickening agent. And you essentially just add a few drops to your batch, and you can put it on a vertical surface. But in this case, I lay the cowl down flat so I can properly fill in the eyes, at the mouth area, the ears, the nose, anything that has a kind of high edge, silicone doesn't really want to build up on there if it hasn't been thickened up. And it can be one of those things where you just keep going and going and layering up. Everywhere else has a nice even coverage, but the ears can ultimately suffer. Now these are our keys. I actually used a spare ice cube tray for this, but I'm also going to grab some Silpoxy from Smooth On, and we're essentially just going to adhere the keys on. We don't need a bunch of keys, but it just helps with the shell mold. Now the Silpoxy is silicone based and it's essentially a silicone adhesive. So the great thing is you can use it on any silicone. Now we're going to do our plaster bandage mother mold. Now originally I was going to do fiberglass, and I actually started the fiberglassing process, but the gel coat just was not kicking properly for some reason. So I opted for plaster bandage. Plaster bandage is a lot more user friendly, a lot more safe. Even though I am wearing a respirator, that's just more or less for the plaster bandage dust. So when I do go to start the front half, I do Vaseline off and seal off and kind of do the release around the perimeter of the back shell. And again, it's very user friendly and it's also strong at the same time. I use Gypsona plaster bandage, which is a medical grade plaster bandage, which it's something you want. And also it was a very hot day considering we're in winter at the moment. So I left that out in the sun to dry and get all that moisture out. So the following day we're ready to demold. Now I'm just cutting off the excess flange around the bottom just to make it all nice and neat. Now I do use disposable pegs to keep everything in place. Now when you're taking the front half of the shell mold, it's really a back and forth thing. You don't want to put too much stress on the chin area because that's where a lot of buildup can be in terms of a vacuum release. Now I use a combination of Vaseline and dishwashing soap to put over the surface so this peels off easily, especially around the chin, but also the nose and the ears. It's one of those things with the ears, you want to be so careful not to tear that silicone. Even though it's fresh, cured silicone, you still run the risk of tearing it, especially when that demolding right at the end. Now I'm going to grab our F140. So part A is 50, part A is 100. So I did 5 batches in total. The first 3 were 400 grams. So that equates to 133 grams to 266 grams. Obviously with the 300, it's part A 100, part B 200 grams. So this particular cowl uses a lot of urethane. But as you saw before just then, I take a disposable little hobby brush and brush the urethane in the tip of the ears so we don't get any air bubbles. Now the great thing about F140 is you've got about 7 minutes, which is great to get full coverage. And the next day we're ready to demold. I'm just going to sprinkle some talcum powder in there just to make it all soft and smooth and not tacky so it won't stick to itself when we demold. Now when you do demold a urethane cowl, you've really got to take your time, push it inwards to release it all, especially those ears. Really dig your hands down the bottom and then slowly pull the casting out. And quite frankly, it was a flawless casting. No air bubbles in the ears, the nose, the stitching looked great, and I was very happy. Now we're just going to start the trimming process, obviously getting rid of all that excess urethane and also cutting out the mouth opening and the eye holes. Now I just use a fine hobby knife just to really take my time. Some people use scissors, obviously use scissors for the neck seal area, but when it comes to the opening of the mouth and the eyes, I want it to look pristine and almost like it was cut by a machine, and then obviously separating the neck seal from the top of the cowl. Now unfortunately the files were corrupt when I was showcasing how to glue down the hood to the neck seal, but this is the Lycra hood I have that's an ocean diving hood that you can get offline. Now I use Sikaflex 227 to adhere the neck seal to the Lycra hood, as you can see right there, and I let that sit overnight. So luckily I took these progress photos just so it gives you guys something to look at. Now once everything was dry, I kind of trimmed everything and just make sure everything was hunky-dory on the inside, but we've got to attach our Velcro to the back of the neck seal, which I've obviously slit down the back. So I got a mixture of neoprene, EVA foam, and self-adhering Velcro. And it's one of those things where you have to build up one side so it evenly sits flush with the other Velcro, just so the neck seal, both pieces, both sides sit flush. Otherwise one is going to be higher than the other, if that makes sense. A little bit of engineering, a little bit of thinking that has to go into this. Otherwise, if you just do 2 sides of Velcro, one will be higher than the other. Now when it comes to painting this thing, it was very experimental, but I really dialed in a method that really worked for me. So I'm just going to grab a sand brown. This is an airbrush paint from my local hobby shop. dialing my airbrush out on full and misting it over the neck seal and the cowl. And you do kind of build up in certain areas, you know, like the neck muscles and stuff like that, the kind of high-rise areas. You add a bit more paint, but just slowly misting on this particular color. And you don't want it a stark sand brown on the surface. You just want it to evenly coat everywhere, just so it gets into all that leathery detail. And it went on great. And it also is a nice little starting point. It definitely gives that leather look, but we do have to dial it back. Now, originally I experimented with steel wool, but ultimately what I found works best is a scourer sponge, or as some people call it, a Brillo pad, soaked in warm water, get rid of the excess water and start to scour away that paint. But what's left is like a leathery grain, and also picks up and highlights all the stitching areas. And once you pat it dry, it looks great. And you can really dial it back as much as you want. It's very subjective. So, you know, there are certain areas that still may be built up with the sand brown, and you can just hit it with the scourer sponge once again and dial it back, just so it's not too leathery and not too weathered in a certain area. And obviously doing the same for the cowl. You can see all that beautiful detail and stitching being highlighted when we remove the excess. Now, I wanted a hint of a blue, depending how you lit it. So I got a Payne's Grey oil color and very lightly dry brushed it all over the surface with a chip brush. And again, it's very subjective. You know, you can dial it in and really build it up on certain areas, like the neck muscles right there. As you can see, I'm really highlighting it. But then I grabbed a white oil color. Once everything was done, once everything I felt looked nice and leathery, and highlighted the stitching. And you definitely have to build it up because the oil does absorb into the urethane. But as you build it up, it just gives that illusion of weathered stitching, old leather stitching. Now, once I was happy with all this, I sealed the entire cowl up with a Liquitex matte varnish. And now we're ready for the final reveal. And there you go, guys, the Gotham Noir cowl is done and dusted. Beyond over the moon with how it's turned out, especially just making it a two-piece cowl with that hood. Just makes for a bit of extra neck movement. So, been tinkering with different urethanes. Obviously, you guys saw that this was cast in F140. Well, this is F160, so it's a bit more helmety. As nice, soft, and supple as the F140 is, this kind of adheres to your face a little bit more, especially in those really hard turns where the cowl wants to lift away from here. So this is definitely something that I'm looking into in terms of for the final film. Do we use an F160 upper cowl and an F140 lower piece, because this is definitely the piece that needs to be a lot more softer. Now, with that being said, a massive thank you to my good buddy Miles at Flux 3D for helping with the initial head scan. A massive thank you to Art Deving for creating this beautiful 3D file. And of course, my good buddy Benny of Benable FX for printing my 3D scan and also helping out casting this beautiful chest element. And of course, my dear friend Josh for helping with the filming of this reveal footage and those cheeky photos that you are seeing. With that being said, the Kickstarter for Gotham Noir is well underway. I will leave the link down below. Please help out, every little bit counts. With that also being said, wherever you are in the world, please have yourselves an absolute cracker of a day. I hope you all. Hope you're happy. Be merry, be silly. And until next time, geeks and geekettes, please always remember, cosplayers do it best. Yeah.